Hi, class. This is a quick getting started with Jupyter Notebooks tutorial, along with some tips and tricks. So here I'm sharing my screen. I've got Anaconda Navigator pulled up, and you see all of the software properties that are part of Anaconda Navigator. We're going to be using, obviously, Jupyter Notebook here. So we click on the launch button. That then will open your browser and open a new tab in your browser and then bring you to the Jupyter Navigator here. Now, this is just a file navigator. So your job would be then to go and navigate to your CompSci 240 folder. Here's mine, COMSC 240. And here's a bunch of the content from previous classes in there. So the first thing to remember is with a notebook file, when I give you one to download, for example, you don't want to just download it and then double click on it in your file system. Like, let's say I've got a file here in my downloads, and I want to just open up that Jupyter Notebook. You can't double click on it in your file navigator, meaning your Finder on Mac or in your Windows Explorer on Windows. Can't double click on it. Instead, you have to go through Jupyter Notebooks. So open up Jupyter Notebooks, brings it to the file navigator, and it's here that you will see your notebooks, and it's here that you can open them up. Let me find just any random one here. And here's a notebook that has got some content in it. Now, once you have a notebook that's open, you don't want to just X out of the tab here to close it, because that actually doesn't close the notebook. You will want to get into the habit of clicking File and then Close and Halt to close any particular notebook. Doing so will shut down the notebook and then close it, because anytime there's a notebook that's running, it's actually a small program running. The kernel is running to support this notebook. As an example, here I'm going to open up this Lab 11, okay? I'll click that, and I've got some things here, and I'm going to go ahead and just run this one. There I ran that cell just to kind of show that that the code's working. Now, if I just close out of the tab here without shutting it down, you'll see here back in the file navigator that that file has got this green icon next to it now. And that's showing that, yep, it's still running, even though the tab is closed. So you do want to get into the habit of shutting these down properly and gracefully. Now, if you do get to this position here where the tab is closed and yet the file is still running, you can select it by clicking the checkbox here, and then we get a couple other menu options right up here, and we can select shutdown from that small menu, and it'll shut down the notebook. Now, the same thing applies when you're ready to just quit Jupyter Notebooks. Don't just close the browser or just close the tab, because notebook will still stay running. You got it. So instead, up here, we've got the logout button. That is what you will want to get into the habit of pressing. Once that is pressed, well, then you can go ahead and close out your tab. I'll go back in now and relaunch my Jupyter Notebook. And here we are back again at the file navigator. Now, to open a brand new notebook, that's quite easy. Just over here in this these couple of buttons here, we will click New and Python 3. That creates a new notebook based on Python 3. Click on it, and there we go. Our notebook is up here. We can rename the notebook quite easily just by clicking on the title field here. You see that if you hover over it, it highlights. So if you click on that once, you can just rename the file to whatever you want. Here, I'll just do test notebook, hit return, and it renames that notebook. So if we were then to go back into our navigator here, and let me go ahead and sort by the last modified, you'd see here that test notebook does show up now. And by the way, just what I just did here, we have a couple of options in our navigator over here to sort by name, or we could sort by the last modified, either ascending or descending. And those will be convenient to locate various files. Here in this test notebook, then you can just put in some Python code. And run it, and we all have a nice day. Everything runs fine. But that brings up another question. How do you run code in Python notebooks? And it's easy. First, you can, with the cursor in the cell, you can either select this run button, click that one time and it'll run it. You can also click this little icon next to the cell. It looks like a run this, its mouse tip is run this cell. It looks sort of like a next chapter button, but you can click that to run. And then additionally, you can click cell here, and we've got a bunch of options. You can run cells, and it'll run that. Later, when we get into much longer Jupyter notebooks, these options here, run all below and run all above, those will come into handy. Let's say you've got a whole bunch of cells and you just want to run this one and below because maybe this one stuck, it had a little error you had to fix. You don't need to run everything up above. And so select run all below, and it'll run that cell and all of the ones below. It really should be labeled run this cell and all below, but the mouse tip does say that, run this cell and all cells below it. All right, those are the three ways then to run a cell. Now, a cell can either be a coding cell or a cell that we can put text in. And the way that we shift back and forth between those is just changing the characterization of the shell. So here in this menu drop-down box, we can just select Markdown, and it converts this cell that we were just in to a text cell. So now if I just write anything, it just looks like normal text, excuse me. But then we run that cell just like any of the others, and it just appears like normal text. Oh, another great shortcut to learn is Control-Enter. Here's another print line, and Control-Enter is the shortcut for running a cell, and you'll want to get into that habit of using shortcuts. Here you can see the Control-Enter shortcut reminder here to run this cell. So get into that habit. You'll want to just code something real quick and then boom, Control-Enter to run it. Now let's see. To add a cell, you can do a number of things. One is you can click this plus button, and that will just insert a cell below the current cell. If you want to get rid of a cell, you click the scissors button. Now, you can't click in a cell for these. Oh, actually, you can for that one. But normally, you would want to click outside the cell, but still select the cell by clicking anywhere over here to the left outside of it. And the cell highlights in a little blue sidebar here, and that shows you that you've got this one selected. So I'll delete a couple of these now, add a couple. Moving a cell is easy, just highlight it, and then you guessed it, use the up and down arrows to move that cell to anywhere you want. Now you can also change the characterization of a cell just by hitting M for Markdown. And then you can go back, of course, to code anytime you want. Now, if we make a Markdown cell, that's just going to give us text. We can do links. I'll show that later. But for text, we do type a number of text formats here. So if you just type normal text in there and then run that cell, it appears just like normal font. But there are a few extra things that we can do. One is if we preface a line of text with the pound sign and then a space, and the space has got to be there, otherwise it doesn't accept that as a tag. One # will create sort of a broader header, a top level header. So when we run this, it gives us this nice bold header. Same thing, if we use 2, that gives us another level of header, a subordinate level header with the font size a little bit smaller, and yet it's still bold. We can double click this cell again to enter it. And you can see here how you can use 3 and 4 # together to get increasingly smaller headers there. So this the smallest one, that heading style looks like about the same size font. It's just bold. Now those heading specifiers, they apply to the entire line. You can't just take a couple of words and make that bold or this broader font. So that's a good way to type in text. You can type in anything you want. You'll see that my text for my various labs and homeworks have got a bunch of text, and then we do a cell and start coding. Let's see. I'm gonna show next how Jupyter Notebook is unique in that it acts sort of as like a command line interpreter. With a command line interpreter in Python, I don't know if you did that in any of your previous coding experiences, but once you enter some statement that is successfully interpreted, well, the results of that statement stay resident in memory. So what do I mean here is, in this particular cell here, we're not going to necessarily need to write a complete Python program that can survive as a standalone in and of itself program. No, we can actually kind of parse our code and sort of chunk it up. Here I'm going to I'll create a variable called a. I'll assign the integer 5 to it. And here we have a = 5. Now, I ran the cell, and of course, nothing happened because we didn't tell it to do anything other than assign the integer 5 to the variable a. But to show that this variable a is in fact registered in memory and available for use, well, down here in another cell, if we were to print a, it's not going to give us any grief. It's going to give us 5 here. Now this a remains in memory. I mean, even if we delete that cell, it's still in memory. And surprisingly, if we ran this cell again, it is going to still run because a is in memory. So you'll see frequently how we can run a cell kind of at the top of our code, and that might have a bunch of housekeeping things, maybe some import statements, maybe defining our functions. You can get those up and running and loaded, and then of course run the rest of your code subsequently. Now, if we, of course, don't have that, what I'm going to do now is delete the cell. No, I'll leave the cell in here, but now I'll just say like we'll print b instead. And of course, we will get an error because the variable b has not been defined. If we go back to a, then it prints fine. Sometimes with Jupyter Notebooks, just like with any computer program, you might need to restart it. And the easiest way to restart it, rather than shutting down all of Jupyter Notebooks and all of Anaconda Navigator, the easiest way is just to restart the kernel. Now, the kernel is just a little kind of slice of software that resides between the processor and the application, and that kernel is feeding data to the processor and giving the processor specific instructions. So we can take that kernel and reboot the kernel. That will have the sense of rebooting your notebook and restarting it, and that's going to be quite easy. Here's the kernel menu bar item. Just select that, and you can click Restart. It gives you a little "Are you sure?" dialog box, and then give it a second, and it'll restart the kernel. You saw a little flash up here saying that the kernel is ready, and now our notebook is essentially restarted. Now I'm going to run just this cell here, print a, just this cell, And you can see that it gives us an error. And why is that? We defined A up here, and yet we're trying to access A. And when we call the reference to A, it's giving us an undefined. And why is that? Well, it's because we restarted the kernel. So that rebooted our notebook. And we never ran this cell again. So A just is not in memory. So that's why we're getting that error. If we were to run that cell first and then run this cell, then we won't get the error because A is in memory. Let's see, a couple of other things to look at. One is the shortcut for inserting cells. And again, you want to get into the habit of using shortcuts. You can use A and B as a shortcut. A will insert a cell above the current cell, and B will insert a cell below the current cell. So let's say I'm in this cell and I'm working. And I want to insert a new cell. I can just go outside of that and hit B for a cell beneath it and A for a cell above it. Isn't that easy? Now you can do the combination of BM if you want to make it a markdown cell, or you can do the combination of AM to make the cell that you insert a markdown cell ready for some type of text entry. Let's see, I think that's about the basics here. We won't use any of those things, but we'll be restarting the kernel. We'll be running the cells above and below. You can also insert, here's the menu item for that, but you can see A and B are the shortcuts for that. Yeah, that should really get us started. Now, you want to get into the habit of saving quite often. Just like in computer science, you always want to save because you never know when that disaster is going to strike. Now, this will auto-save a checkpoint every few minutes, but if you want to take control of that, just click this save button right here, the little disk icon. You can also hit File, Save, and Checkpoint. And the third method is just with any particular cell selected, just hit Control S, and that will save that checkpoint for you. Now, the cool thing about checkpoints is that if you kind of go down a rabbit hole and you decide I want to trace my path out of this rabbit hole and backtrack my code, you can go and revert to a checkpoint, provided that you make a checkpoint at a certain time. You can go and just revert that checkpoint. So frequently save your code. It creates a checkpoint for you, and you can always revert your code to that if you need to roll back for any reason. Okay, gang, I think this is about enough to get started. I'm going to go ahead and close and halt this notebook. Again, make sure you close and halt. Don't just shut down the tab. And now you can see here this test notebook that we did. The icon did change from green to this black one, and the black is showing then that it is successfully shut down. Okay. Let me know if you've got any questions. Just email me, and I hope that this little tutorial will help you get started with Jupyter Notebooks. All right, we'll see you online, everybody.